Senator Mike Braun here. It is an honor to be able to say a few words about the solemnity of this occasion. All of us know what occurred 18 years ago. Remember where we were. I was recently with Senator Rick Scott visiting Israel, and sometimes you forget about how close danger is around you. In this case, I knew most of what we ended up seeing, spending 4 or 5 days in Israel. But until you understand that some places you have to have a fence, you have to have a berm, in some cases 2 fences to keep enemies out, that drives home what 9/11 was about, and so that we can never forget that defense and keeping ourselves strong is important. And when you need to respond in a way that shows that we never will default on leadership and always do what is right. That's what occurred back then, but we always need to be vigilant. I was disappointed before I ran for Senate that it looked like our national defense was weakening, and thank goodness that now under President Trump has been re-enabled. But we can never become lackadaisical about it. We should always be vigilant because in this day and age, especially when you've got oncoming powers like China, you still have Russia out there. We need to be in the forefront. We need to have this country strong so that we never, ever lose sight of what might happen. And for all the families and all the sacrifice that was associated with the 9/11 tragedy, that memory hopefully will never fade. This nation needs to stay strong, and we need to be in a leadership position in this world and make it all work out to where we can pay for it in the long run. Thanks for listening to me, and be happy to take any questions.
Hi, Senator Dan Spieler from Fox 59 here. Thanks for taking the time with us today. I wanted to ask you on this 9/11 anniversary week, there's obviously a lot of talk also about the NSA, the National Security Advisor's departure, and also the meetings with the Taliban that were scrapped, reportedly amidst some back and forth between the president and some of his closest advisors about how to handle that situation. Do you think it was the right move for the president to cancel that meeting? And do you agree with his move to change direction with the National Security Advisor?
So I think he would know better than anyone whether John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, was still going to be someone that was going to work into his long-term strategy. I think President Trump had it right from the get-go. We cannot be entangled in so many places across the world, but we still need to be vigilant, like I said earlier. But I think in this case, Secretary of State Pompeo, probably was closer to being on the mark of what we need to do. I think President Trump did, in the moment, cancel that meeting with the Taliban. I see nothing wrong with that. But down the road, I think the solution is going to be to discuss and to talk about it. And we may still not get anywhere because these enemies are tough. They dig in for the long run. Same issue we're dealing with trade, not militarily, but for trade with China. Many of these countries have patience and endurance that would be a lot deeper than ours. So I feel comfortable that that is the right approach. Remember, President Trump, too, talked about sooner or later, you're going to have to acknowledge that we're running trillion-dollar deficits, and we cannot afford to have that kind of exposure to the extent we do without getting more help from our allies. I think all of that plays into the moment, and I think they'll do just fine trying to negotiate with the Taliban. But I know, and Americans should be realistic as well as Hoosiers, these enemies that we have, they live there, they have patience, they're in it for the long run, and we need to have a strong presence in the sense that if there's an event or something catastrophic that occurs, that we can move in. But I don't think we can view it the way we have in the past because we simply can't afford to do that in the long run. Next question.
Senator, this is Warren Korf at WEHT here in Evansville. speaking of other security issues, guns seem to be a big issue that the Senate and even the House are going to have to deal with between now and Election Day, or even the end of the year. I mean, is there going to be any movement on gun control this year or not? And where do you stand? What are you okay with saying? I'm fine with this portion of gun control. I'm not fine at this portion.
So when it comes to our Second Amendment rights, I would be one of the staunchest defenders of that right built into the Constitution. On the other hand, we should make sure, for the sake of maintaining those Second Amendment rights, that we do anything that we need to do to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and the mentally ill. And if you've got to tighten up background checks when it's going to keep a gun out of the hands of somebody that's mentally ill or a criminal, we need to do it. Red flag laws, which we've had in Indiana, I think for close to 14 years. I have not had any instances of hearing any that were over the top, and they've actually reduced the rate of suicides using a gun. So for any of us where the Second Amendment is dear, we never want it ever to be diluted for law-abiding citizens. We do that, in essence, by doing nothing when it comes to criminals and the mentally ill. I was disappointed in so many instances where someone that ends up committing a mass atrocity has advertised it on social media, even to the point of a manifesto. That's the intention of a red flag law. It's worked where states have had it. I like it that states have tried it first before we'd consider it as a federal government. But when we do it, we have to be careful, because the fear of many is that you do this and it would lead to other things that would affect the rights of law-abiding citizens to bear and keep arms, and I won't be for that. And if they try to do that now, it won't go anywhere. Common sense gun legislation, yes. Let's start there and make sure it's focused on criminals and the mentally ill. Next question.
Program. You might have even punched somebody's ticket to a better life.
Yeah, like mine.
So.
Do you have any other outlets to ask the question?
Go ahead.
Senator, if we have a second, this is Warren Corf again. I want to go back to the 9/11.
Yeah.
Obviously, you were not a U.S. senator at the time, but what were you doing on 9/11, 2001, and what were some of your thoughts back then before you were actually officially in public office? What during that day?
I remember it vividly because I was at work that morning, and we had a few years ago moved into a new building in the town of Jasper, and we were going through our normal I think it was Tuesday morning routine, and found out what happened, watched it with dismay, saw the second plane hit, the World Trade Center, and it was unbelievable. It was also at a time where it kind of was so out of the blue, we weren't prepared for that kind of thing. But it was a reminder of what I said earlier, that you've got to always be vigilant, you've got to always be strong. We have enemies around the world. So, of course, we all got through that day somehow. And I do remember, too, after that, the rest of that year, the economy was shaky. It had kind of surprised Americans that much, and even impacted the economy. Of course, that all got back on its feet in the following year. We knew that the world wasn't going to end, but we knew that it was a different dynamic. And I think kudos to our defense, and the fact that we've not had anything like that occur since doesn't mean that we can lower our guard. So, but no, I remember that we delayed decisions in our own business in terms of what to do. That shows you what kind of impact it can have. And thank goodness we had a strong response, eventually held the culprit, found him, and he paid the ultimate price. And we got to always take that approach when something like that does occur, that we use every bit of the resources we have to make sure justice is had.
And are there any other outlets on the call that wish to ask a question?
So we've got back from our summer recess, and there's a lot on the agenda. We spent a lot of time in several committees on trying to lower the cost of health care. I'd say of any issue out there, not only during the campaign, but the time I've spent here, that is probably the issue that impacts Hoosiers and Americans more than any every day. I've been disappointed a little bit in the industry itself. I've said all along, when you've got 80 senators that have weighed in to try to help you with your business to be more transparent and more competitive, that's not a good sign. It's not going to go away. I wish the healthcare industry would start self-correcting, operate like all the rest of us that calls ourselves free enterprisers. It's not the case in healthcare. Healthcare consumers need to demand the same, and I'm hoping that we get some things across the finish line that start to prime the pump. Border security is the other thing I hear a lot about. We're going to keep plowing forward to secure the border. I'm one that believes we need a lot more legal immigration. Many businesses need help. We need to start solving all the problems that have been created from a porous border. So those will be issues that are important to me. Infrastructure gets talked about a lot. Thank the Hoosier State for what it did back in 2017, kind of the envy of the nation in terms of what we did for long-term road funding. Sadly, I don't think that's going to happen out here to match the efforts we made back there. I'll be vocal on all those issues and many more.